Rock bottom is not a plan. It is a high risk gamble. It is not a reliable recovery plan. But before we go any further, I want you to stay with me to the end of this episode because I've got a big announcement. I'm going to share something completely new, something that I have never offered before. And I'm doing that because for years, well, since the beginning of of me starting doing this work, there's only been 2 ways to work with me, and both of those required a bit of a time commitment, and but I know that there are moms who cannot commit to the amount of time that it takes to work with me, and so I wanted to create another option, and something that I kept seeing on my road to recovery calls really has struck with me. I have parents fill out a form when they sign up for that call. And on that form, I just noticed consistently parents rating themselves at a 10 out of 10 ready for change, but only a 5 out of 10 in belief that things could actually get better. And that belief was always based on the past and how things had been with their child, and not really thinking about the changes that they could make and what a difference that that could make. And it's not that they're lacking desire for change, it's just that they're losing hope because they've tried so many things and nothing has worked so far. But I just couldn't stand back and watch families be so hopeless when I had to a way to help them. I'm always talking about how we need to lower barriers for our kids to getting help. And so I'm always thinking about the ways that I can lower barriers for you guys to get the help and support that you want. So I created this more accessible program to give you an opportunity to be a part of this completely different approach that I offer without having to commit to months of coaching. So it's really designed to help you quickly move from desperately wishing that things could be different to actually having real hope because you can see now how change is possible. And you know, if you're like me and you've been thinking like there has to be a better way, but that better way better feel doable because I'm exhausted. That's what I used to always think. Then just stay with me till the end of this episode, and I'm going to tell you exactly what I created and how you can be a part of it. So, back to rock bottom being a high risk gamble and not a recovery plan. I was doing some research on it, and I found this study that set out to make the very abstract concept of rock bottom. They took that concept and they turned it into something measurable so it could be scientifically studied. And they had to do that because outside of the study, the term rock bottom is, it's very vague and it is different for each person. I mean, if you heard it talked about 10 times, you're going to hear it talked about in different ways. But that study found that the turning points, which I prefer the term turning points over rock bottom because a turning point can happen at any time. Turning points are mental, they're not situational. So I'm going to go into explaining that a little bit more. But when we hear the term rock bottom talked about, it's talked about in the context of natural consequences like getting kicked out of the house, losing a job, losing relationships. But it's so interesting. This study found that those types of losses are not what motivates a person to change. Those types of losses are not what motivates a person to change. Instead, the turning point is psychological. And it comes from identity and an internal values conflict. So that conflict would sound something like, I am not acting like the person who I want to be. And this study analyzed how psychological and emotional problems interact with addiction. And it found that when a person is drowning in severe emotional distress and shame and a sense of a loss of control, then it actually acts as a barrier to change. So, high levels of stress and perceived lack of control make it incredibly difficult for a person to rationally weigh the pros and cons of their substance use, which goes against everything we hear, right? So, of course, I'm so curious. I always have a lot of questions. The study made me think about something that it did not directly answer, and that is what happens when shame has damaged a person's sense of worth so deeply. And I've done a whole episode on that around December of last year about being a peaceful mom. When a person's sense of worth has been so deeply damaged that they no longer feel that they have a positive identity to protect. How can they have that identity clash that motivates change? I think that that is one of the reasons why connection and how we treat our kids is so important. Because when we consistently treat somebody with dignity, love, and respect, we help create the possibility for them to see themselves as worthy of a different life. When I stopped using tough love with Helanna, my daughter, and I started using craft, our relationship drastically changed. Never again did I raise my voice at her, do things that I knew were disrespectful, or treat her with anything other than unconditional positive regard. Now, once I learned about craft, there was quite a bit of deconditioning that still needed to happen. There was a lifetime of tough love conditioning. And so there were times that I made decisions that I didn't agree with as don't agree with now as I was learning, but I never did anything without thinking about it first, even if my logic was flawed, if that makes sense. So that positive regard included boundaries that protected me in the relationship, because that's part of what was important for me to remain connected with her. So, I said no to her when I needed to care for myself, or I said no if it felt like it was something that, didn't feel good to say yes to for her, wasn't helpful for her. But I said it with love. And I knew why I was saying it, not just because I felt like I had to. In the very beginning, I was still making some decisions like that. But as I learned, as time went on, I was able to move away from that. And when I interviewed her on the podcast after she was in recovery for a while, and I asked her what made her want to go to treatment. And she said that there was a couple of things, but one of them was that she started to love herself again and feel that she deserved it. She had that identity clash that she was a person who deserved a better life than she was living. She didn't want to live that way anymore. Of course, I'll always wonder if I'd known about craft from the beginning, if things would have been different, if they would have never gotten as bad as they did. I mean, she responded so well to it. I think that I don't think things ever had to get that bad. But before I found craft, I felt like, I used tough love because I felt like if I didn't, then I was actually hurting her. And there's this one memory that I think about where I was in those early days of, just learning craft, but still struggling with a lot of stigmatized beliefs and not fully understanding it. It was really impacting how I thought about things. And there's this one memory I think of a lot. It's one of my big regrets. And I can still clearly see the house that we were standing in. We were standing at the door, and the door was open. We were both standing in the doorway. And I was making her leave that night with nowhere to go. And, it was a couple of months after she had turned 18. One thing that was helping me that night was that, it was not too hot, it wasn't cold, it wasn't raining. And that gave me some comfort. And she's, standing there in the doorway with her backpack on. And, you know, she's just looking at me. And I'm dying inside. And I can see the anger and confusion in her eyes. And she had not asked to stay at the house before that because we had not been getting along. But because I had learned about craft, our relationship was changing and there was more connection. But and I was slowly changing how I was interacting with her, but I was still struggling with those stigmatized beliefs, like that she couldn't stay at the house or, that I was enabling her. I hate that word, but that's really what I thought at the time. So she's turning to me for help, but I'm making her leave because I think that I have to. And as she walked out of the house that night, she said to me, "It's so effed up that you're sending your 18-year-old daughter out on the streets with nowhere to go." And everything inside of me was screaming that it was wrong and I did not want to do it, but I felt like I had to because I had been given this blueprint of stigma that if I did anything to make her life easier, then I was keeping her from recovery. I was hurting her. And so I believed that I had to let her suffer, that she had to feel more pain or she would never get better. So I was wanting her to get to that painful place as fast as possible. And I remember standing there watching her walk in the direction of the intersection until I couldn't see her anymore. And I shut the door and I was just full of conflicted emotions. And so I went to my office to write about it. And I ended up using the words that she said to me to help justify my actions that night. And, because she had said it's so effed up that you're making me leave with nowhere to go. And what I decided was that it was so effed up that she wouldn't help herself by going to treatment because if she'd just gone to treatment, she'd have a place to go. And the thing is, I had to think that to be able to live with myself and what I was doing. I had to blame her so that I could live with myself. I told myself that she was the one choosing to walk the streets all night instead of going to treatment, and I also blamed her for putting me in that position. Now, I didn't this didn't happen between me and her, this was all happening inside of me or me writing about it. But it was just that the blame and anger were easier for me to live with than the guilt and fear, and I had not deconditioned that stigma enough to realize that, she had had really bad, um, experiences with treatment centers and therapists and reaching out for help. And so once I, understood things better, that made more sense to me that it wasn't this cut and dry, easy choice that I was making it out to be that night. And, it's been a decade and I still think about what Helena must have felt that night. And, she was only 18, scared and alone. Like, how could her family turn her away? I'm 54 years old and I try to imagine myself in that situation. I think about it every time I pass a person who I know is most likely unhoused or walking with a backpack on. And I think about my daughter walking around that night all night. And I think I would feel really ashamed and confused. And I wouldn't even know where to go or what to do. Yet I expected my 18-year-old daughter to figure it out and to love herself enough to get help, even though, I was doing better. But for a long time, I've been treating her like she did not deserve the help. And, you know, as I've said, I was learning craft at the time, but progress was really slow because I've been looking for somebody to help me learn it better. But I just don't think that 10 years ago, there were not the coaches that help with craft like there are today. So I was having to try to figure all of this stuff out on my own, which is always slower because it's a lot of stuff to work through, as you know. So I followed that tough love blueprint much longer than I would have if, had I not had help to work me through it, to help me see all these stigmatized beliefs that I had. And so thinking about that experience got me thinking about natural consequences and how I've really come to see them as I used to think that we had to allow them all, we had to cause pain, we wanted her to hit rock bottom as soon as possible to end everybody's suffering. But now I think that they can actually be counterproductive when they're misunderstood and not used properly. And before I explain that, I just want to say that I don't share that story to say that it's always wrong to not let your child stay with you. I know that some adult children, it is not good for them to be at home. It's not good for them. It's not good for the family. It's about the reasons that you make the decision, right? And that night, I didn't make my decision based on good information. So, and I've done a whole episode about that, making that decision as well. But going back to natural consequences and how they aren't always used properly, that belief in rock bottom comes from the idea that it takes pain to change. You have to feel pain to change. And natural consequences can look like part of that same idea, but the way that they're used in craft is very different because pain is not the strategy. It's very balanced. And remember the study that I was talking about in the beginning of the episode, it found that turning points don't come just from losses. They come from that internal conflict between how a person is living and who they believe they are or who they want to be. So, natural consequences are a part of craft because they can allow a person to experience cause and effect without the family adding pain, punishment, shame, but they're only one small part of the craft framework. They they are just a small part of it, and craft does not say that you have to stand back and allow every consequence. You have to consider safety and capability as well. So, is your child capable of what you're expecting them to do? Are we actually capable of helping? And, what would that helping require from us? So we have to consider everybody in the equation and their capabilities. And rather than just applying this one size fits all rigid rule to everything, you know, punishment is just about forcing a person to change, but natural consequences are that cause and effect result of what happens without us manufacturing it. So, for example, like if your child sleeps in late and is late for work, the manager writes them up. That's a natural consequence. But if you yell at them and you lecture them and try to make them feel worse or punish them, right? Now you're adding punishment to the consequence that they have already experienced, and you don't have to do that. You don't have to add anything. You can allow the situation to be handled at work and just keep your focus on your relationship with your child. The situation's been handled, it's not your responsibility. And that can be an enormous relief for parents because constantly being the police, watching for everything that they're doing wrong, it is exhausting. It keeps us dysregulated and on high alert. It also, turns the relationship into a project. It's just about correcting and finding wrong. And nobody wants to be a project, and no parent wants to be the police. So, considering capability is a really important part of the situation that we don't take into consideration enough. I made an episode about that as well. But so suppose your child isn't genuinely capable of paying their rent. They can't work for some reason, they can't pay their rent. And you are living on a fixed income and you live in a retirement community where they're with age restrictions. So you don't have the money to pay their rent and you can't house them because of the age restrictions. So in that case, your inability to house them or pay their rent is not a strategy to make them suffer. It's not even you allowing a natural consequence to force change. It is a real limit on what you are capable of providing. But if, on the other hand, if your child needs help and you financially are capable and providing that help is consistent with your values, it's not going to hurt you in any way, you don't automatically have to withhold it just to create a consequence. You get to decide what is best for the situation. And that nuance is missing from the idea of rock bottom. And also, it's missing from when most people talk about natural consequences. We need room to consider capability, safety, values, the reasons behind the decision, right? Not just following a rule that suffering leads to recovery, because that's just not true. And natural consequences are only one small part of craft. They're part of a much larger framework. I use positive reinforcement, positive communication, listening to understand, learning what drives your child's substance use, using that understanding to support change and taking care of yourself. That's those are huge differences between the rock bottom approach and craft. But that rock bottom message puts parents in such an impossible position. On one hand, you're being told that you're powerless and there's nothing that you can do to help them. And on the other hand, you're told that if you help in the wrong way, that you're preventing their rock bottom and keeping them from recovery. So somehow, wait for it, you are both powerless and responsible. What? Have you ever thought about that? That you are powerless and responsible. Doesn't make sense, right? That's why I love craft so much and that middle ground that they offer. I understand, like, we cannot control another person's behavior, but that doesn't mean that we don't have any power at all. We do have influence. We do have control over ourselves and how we show up and how we interact with them and the quality of those interactions with our child and our relationship, right? You can change again how you communicate, strengthen that connection, reinforce any movement in a healthier direction, anything you want to see more of, right? Understanding why your child is using substances, what it's doing for them, what they can replace that with in a healthy way. All right, setting boundaries that honor your needs and protect you, and taking care of yourself so that you have the capacity to show up in a sustainable way. None of these things are guarantees, of course, but they create more possibility. Rock bottom just focuses on creating enough negative experiences to force change, but craft recognizes that positive experiences not only matter, but they're critical. Connection, dignity, encouragement, and opportunities to experience themselves as capable can strengthen a person's sense of who they are and who they want to be, which is what we talked about earlier. That study saw is what motivates change. So that creates more opportunity for that identity values conflict. This is not who I want to be or who I see myself as, so I'm going to make changes. And but when we treat people who use substances as less human or less worthy or undeserving of love, I mean, that affects how they see themselves. I mean, think about it. It would affect me that way. I would see myself differently if everybody started treating me awfully. But when we treat somebody with love and dignity and acceptance, which does not mean that we agree with everything they do or we have to participate in everything they do, we can create an environment where a stronger sense of self in alignment with values has room to grow. And that stronger sense of self can support the belief that a different life is possible and that they are worthy of it. How wonderful is that? So, there's another reason that we need to question the idea that enough negative consequences will force somebody to change. Think about this. Part of the diagnosis of substance use disorder is a person continuing to use substances despite serious negative consequences. So, if consequences alone reliably stop substance use, then people would stop before they lost their relationships, freedom, health, housing, kids, right? But the diagnosis is that they continue to use despite serious negative consequences. So that's obviously not enough. We need something else. Right? That doesn't mean the consequences don't matter at all. It's not what I'm saying. It just means that they can't be the only thing we're relying on. They can't be the primary path to recovery because that oversimplifies something really complex. When natural consequences are used thoughtfully within the craft framework, they can create opportunities for a person to experience their own capability. So think about if you've been calling into work for your child when they oversleep, right? And then you're lecturing them afterward, right? You're taking ownership of them getting to work on time. You're stressed out about it. So you're fighting about it, right? So you're taking their responsibility from them while also reinforcing the message that they are failing and not capable of doing it themselves. What might happen if you stop doing both? Maybe you stop calling their employer, you don't lecture them, you just allow them to decide what to do next. And maybe they won't respond the way that you hope, but what if they do take responsibility for it? Or, and they do call their manager or they set an alarm or they make it to work on time. Then you have the opportunity to notice that and positively reinforce it positively. It totally changes your interaction, right? And then over time, experiences like that can help somebody to start to see themselves differently, right? Not just as somebody who keeps failing, but as somebody who is capable of taking a step in a positive direction. So I know that's a really simple example, but and every situation is different. The result's never guaranteed, but it just gives us another way to think about that there are some good benefits of natural consequences, right? Like thinking about giving a person the dignity to figure out things that they are capable of figuring it out. So it's not about protecting them from every single uncomfortable experience. And it's not about completely standing back and doing everything that we can to add more pain because we believe suffering will lead to change, right? It's just about finding that middle ground. We want to thoughtfully decide. It's a decision, not because we have to. We just want to thoughtfully decide when we're going to allow natural consequences when it's safe, right? Without adding shame or punishment. And we want to surround our kids with the things that will create the possibility of recovery, like connection, dignity, positive reinforcement, loving boundaries, opportunities to experience themselves as capable. We can't force it, but we can create the best possible conditions for it. E. And we want them to see themselves as worthy and capable so they have a stronger sense of who they are and who they want to become, right? That creates more possibility to recognize this isn't who I want to be, and I'm somebody worth helping. And that creates all the difference in how you experience each other. And it brings me back to what I wish I had understood, standing in the doorway that night with Helanna. I just wasn't there yet. I didn't understand yet all the way that I didn't need to make her life more painful. That definitely addiction was doing that on its own, right? Her life was plenty painful at the time, even in a million more ways than I could have even imagined at that time. And I just needed a better blueprint for loving her well in a healthy way without abandoning myself, right? And preserving the connection and continuing to build it so that she could find her way towards positive change. And I also want to say this to any mom who has found themselves following that tough love blueprint. This is not about beating yourself up or judging yourself. We all did it. I did it because we love our kids. And that is what we were told to do. That's what we thought was best, right? So I acted against every instinct as Helanna's mom because I was terrified that following my heart would keep her from recovery. And so this is not about judging anybody. It's just about seeing things in a different light. And I cannot go back in time and give that version of me who made my 18-year-old daughter leave and nowhere to go. Can't give myself different information. I can't give myself the insight that I'm trying to create with this podcast episode. But I can offer you a different blueprint to choose from. And having better information is just part of that because knowing what to do and being able to do it when you are terrified and trying to discern, like I've talked about many times, like what is stigma and what isn't, right? When you get totally confused about things, that's two very different things. And you can understand that connection really matters and still be scared or angry and lose your mind and start lecturing or screaming or calling names when fear takes over. You can know that you can't control your child, but still spend every waking moment trying to figure out how to prevent the next crisis, right? You can write a perfectly reasonable boundary and still be unable to follow through on it because your guilt or fear, right, tells you that it's going to damage your relationship or you're abandoning your child by setting the boundary. None of this again means that you're failing. It just means that we have to have beliefs, a regulated nervous system, and skills that all support each other. They all work together. And that's why I created this new offer that I made, and it's called the Peaceful Mom Blueprint. And it's 5 one-hour sessions where we start replacing that fear-based blueprint that we've all been handed with one that helps you create that peace and clarity about what's right for you, strengthening that connection so that you have more influence, creating boundaries from a place of love and values so that you're able to follow through on them. And also, working on your own life without having to abandon your child to do that. So, none of this is about being like a perfectly calm mother all the time or just finding one decision that will guarantee recovery because a peaceful mom is still human. She still has fear and anger and grief and uncertainty, but peace doesn't mean that those emotions disappear. It means that they don't take over anymore. So you're still going to feel the reality of the situation. You're just going to be able to pause long enough to not react to it, to be able to take an intentional action, to give yourself time to get that discernment, to choose how you want to respond instead of fear just taking over and overriding everything, making decisions that lead to regret, like it did for me that night I made my daughter leave. You're able to take actions more aligned with your values and love, actions that you can feel proud of, even when things are really hard. And again, you are not powerless. You can have influence when you focus on the right things. You can control how you show up and how you experience things. You can change the environment in your home and in what is the environment surrounding your relationship with your son or daughter. You can create more peace for yourself while creating more possibility for them. So, if that sounds appealing to you, I would love for you to join me in the Peaceful Mom Blueprint and thinking about like some results that you could get from that. Like it could mean that you spend less time replaying every single conversation that you regret and more time trusting how you handled things in that conversation. It could mean being able to set a boundary because you know why you set it and you followed it from love, or you set it from love and you're able to follow through on it because you know exactly why you sent it and it's set it and it's aligned with your values. You don't spend the next 3 days drowning in guilt and backpedaling, trying to figure out how to get out of the boundary. It could mean that you have conversations that are calm, right? No more yelling and blame or disconnection, conversations that actually create connection and becoming somebody that your child eventually feels more comfortable being honest with and turning to advice. It could mean having enough peace and emotional capacity to being present for the other areas of your life, enjoying meeting friends and family again, going on vacation, right? But being able to do those things without feeling like you're giving up on your child. It doesn't have to be one or the other. And so the Peaceful Mom Blueprint has 3 levels that you can choose from. So you get to choose your experience. The first level is this is an incredible value. This is introductory pricing. It is only $47 and it includes 5 live 1-hour trainings. So this is for you if you want to learn the blueprint and apply what you have learned on your own. It includes you'll get access to the replays through the end of the weekend after the training. There's a VIP experience that costs $97. In that, you get the 5 one-hour trainings, but you also get an additional hour every day where you get to watch me coach other moms through real life situations. So, you get to learn how to apply it in those complicated moments. And again, you'll have access to replays through the end of the weekend after the training of both hours. And then the third level is the platinum. level, which is 197, and that's limited to only 25 people, 25 moms, because you're going to be able to get coaching, and I wanna make sure that you are able that there's, only enough people so that there's time for everybody who wants coaching to get it. So, you'll get the 5 hours of training, the general training, and you'll be able to get coaching live from me, and again, you'll have access to those replays through the end of the weekend. That platinum gives you the highest level of support, you get that personalized guidance so that you can figure out how to actually apply things in everyday life, and again, because this is the first time that I've ever offered this Peaceful Mom Blueprint, those are introductory prices, and so the next time I offer it, they're gonna go up. So we're gonna be meeting live on Zoom September 14th through the 18th, and so the main training is from 3 to 4 Eastern, and then the coaching will be from 4 to 5 Eastern. So I'll put the link to learn more and sign up in the show notes, or you can go to my website, heatherrosscoaching.com. You'll see a page that's the Peaceful Mom Blueprint. I would love to have you join me in that. If you have any questions about that, you can always email me, heather@heatherrosscoaching.com. So I look forward to seeing you in the Peaceful Mom Blueprint.